Happy Passover, Rick.
Holy smokes, it is Passover.
It
so
is.
I guess we're not doing a very good job at passing over, but we certainly can cover some more ultra racing topics, right?
Sounds good to me.
All right, why don't we talk about something that people may or may not know much about, but we'll kind of cover the basics and we can talk about why some experienced racers might go a little over the top with some of this stuff. The equipment and supplies involved for ultra racing.
That's almost as intimidating as the rules.
It can be, but
But
it
it
doesn't.
shouldn't be.
It doesn't need to be, right?
I
Because
guess the rules shouldn't be intimidating either.
if you've never done the sport or never done one of these longer races, might be like, well, I don't know. When I ride my local Gran Fondo or charity ride, I just get on my bike and we're good. Like it doesn't take much. You don't need all these extra things to do it. I mean, you might have some bike lights, which are always a good idea just for safety reasons. But a lot of these things are pretty unique to our sport of long distance bicycle racing. And even, especially when you talk about road racing where you have follow vehicles and things like that, kind of enters a whole new gist on things. So we'll just kind of pick them apart one by one.
It's a really nice way for the experienced racers to psych out people that are new because they're out there with their fancy bands and all that, and it's like, oh my gosh.
Right. And again, there are some things that people go over the top on. It's already kind of cycling is just an expensive sport in general, but people start layering all these things on, and it's like you don't necessarily need all the things to go out and have a very good bicycle race.
It's nice, but I always use a rental.
You know what? We've raced together several times and we run pretty bare bones with what we have. You just don't need that much. But why don't we cover some of the things that you probably do need and maybe some of the extras, bells and whistles that can be enhancements or maybe not enhancements. So where would you like to start?
How about bikes? That actually is a question that gets asked a lot.
A lot.
Can I have a backup bike?
Yep.
Can I have a time trial bike? Yeah.
Right. And so the answer's, I guess a caveat to all this stuff, you should always check race rules because they may have specific rules where you may or may not be allowed to have certain things. In general, sure, backup bikes are certainly allowed. And as far as bikes, you should have probably a standard road bike setup with some aero bars. As far as getting a real true time trial bike, maybe not necessary. I think they're probably a little too aggressive for the most part. And I guess it kind of depends what you're racing as well. If you're racing a 612-24,
Right.
you may just want a couple bikes set up for aero stuff and aero-ish. Again, I think we've covered it a little bit. In these longer events, you really don't want to be riding like a pro tour rider time trial setup. Generally far too aggressive. Even for 6 hours, it's a really long time to be, like this, but you can have an aero setup with, I think I have 4-inch risers on mine.
Oh, yeah.
Still get the benefits, very comfortable, but not as aggressive and spares your neck and back wear and tear.
Right. It's a change of position and get you moving and yeah.
Yeah, so like I think for my dad's solo RAAM, we had a bike with aero bars set up. Then we had kind of a light aluminum frame bike with no aero bars that he might use for climbing sections or just a change of pace.
Mm-hmm.
All bikes feel a little different, so sometimes it just feels good to change it up. And really, you don't need much more than that.
Taking 2 bikes on RAAM, that's all I've ever taken.
Yeah, and then the other thing, kind of along the bike line, disc wheels, deep dish wheels, I would stay away from discs, especially in RAAM or areas where it can be really windy. Even at Borrego Springs, if we get a year that's windy, those disc wheels toss you around like crazy.
I've got some really deep dish Campy Boras on my setup, and I love riding them, but you're on a windy descent with a crosswind, that can be terrifying.
Right, so coming down like Glass Elevator and RAAM, some of those descents can be scary if you catch a bit of wind. So again, if you want to have disc or deep dish wheels, for parts of the race where it works or any race, probably have a backup set of wheels that, or on your backup bike or something where you can swap those out. So, that's something you don't need 8 bikes out there. 2 is enough. But make the setup slightly different so that you kind of have some options.
And this is the first year I've ever had this happen. I've always had bikes with identical Gruppos because you just want to be able to throw in spare parts and not have to bring a whole lot of extra. I was always told to bring enough parts that you could just build another bike.
Yeah,
Which I think is probably smart.
I think you should have enough parts in the sensitive areas of your bike, right? Do you need a whole bottom bracket and crankset? It's
I
probably
blew
smart.
that out on a tandem.
Yeah, it can happen, but probably not the most common thing. But like brake cables, things like that. And the other tricky thing with bike parts is you should have, definitely bring some extra tubes, extra tires, the basics,
yeah.
right? And never, never, never start your race with tires you've been riding. Unless they've only been ridden 20 miles. Don't show up with the flattened out, tires you've been training on for 3 months. Bad idea. Get fresh tires. But, basic stuff. And along that, have the tools to work on all this stuff too. We made the mistake of forgetting a chain whip. We needed it desperately, so I had to kind of manufacture one on the road. But bring the parts, and bring the tools. And I think one interesting thing now, and I think you could probably speak to this better than myself, but with the technology now, with disc brakes and electronic shifting, be sure someone with you knows how to work on those items.
Absolutely.
I don't ride either, so I'm not very familiar with them, but I know if your disc gets bent or something, whatever, you better have someone that knows how to fix them, because on most of these routes, not just RAAM, but RAO, Texas, there's not a lot of bike shops out there. So you have to be able to work on these things. And I know electronic shifting, as awesome as it is for your hands over the course of RAAM, you got to be able to work on it. Because I believe when we raced Hoodoo, you had some battery issues with yours, I think.
It came unplugged.
Oh, came unplugged, right. So, again, know how to work with these things. Don't show up. I can fix any older bike. I wouldn't know where to start with a disc brake. I have no idea. I can make my bikes work no matter what.
Well, I've got Campy Record on the Gerard and Shimano Ultegra on the Giant, so that's going to be.
Well, that'll be fun. So you have to have double your kit.
Yeah, not smart.
No.
But what are you going to do?
But again, work with what you have. So, but that's another really important thing. You do not need to go re-outfit your whole bike just for a race or two. If you're going to be doing a lot of racing over the time, maybe it's worth it to switch it out. But just bring the tools for both. It's not that much stuff.
Yeah, and having bikes again with the not the same Gruppos, that it causes an issue with spare wheels.
Yeah, exactly.
You got a tired crew, they grab the Campy cassette and the wheel with the Campy cassette, and I'm on the bike that's got Ultegra. It's not going to fit.
Going to make that shifting a little bit difficult.
A little bit.
So again, have a couple bikes. Always a good idea, no matter the distance of the race. Unless you just are traveling somewhere and can't bring 2 bikes. But if you can, have 2 bike options. Have parts enough to basically keep you on the road.
Spare wheels.
Spare wheels are always a good idea, if nothing else. If you can't bring 2 bikes, spare wheels are pretty nice. Also, a spare saddle, too, is also pretty handy. And then, of course, the parts to work, parts and tools all got to work. So you need to have enough of that to make it happen. And then,
how about lights?
One of my favorite topics, bike lights, the thing that everybody hates. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to go find a couple videos. We'll put them on our website about why bike lights should be used at all times, training, racing, anything. These were put together, one by a light company, but it's very demonstrative of why you want them, but you're like, oh, they're just trying to sell lights. Okay, that's fine. There's also another video made by a good friend of ours, Ryan Van Duzer, here in town, who's a bike touring guy, rides all over the world, and a professional racer. Why you ride with bike lights. They are so critical and the dumbest thing to cut corners on. They are so affordable now. I think the last set of lights I bought for my wife and I were like $50 on Amazon, headlight, tail light combo, bright, super bright. So, and you know, the battery life is really designed for more recreational riding. But even still, go buy 2 or 3 sets of them. They're still $150. You buy a $10,000 bike, but you won't spend $150 on some lights. They're what can keep you alive.
Mm-hmm. And they're rechargeable now too.
Yes, and they're great. Like, and again, it's just one of those things. Don't cut corners with them. They're just not worth it. They'll last basically forever. You know, they could be the difference of you having a really safe ride or a really unsafe ride, even in the daylight. You know, don't cut corners on that. There's no reason. I get questions like, or people show up to WTTC, for example, with these little dinky lights that are atrocious. I'm like, there's not a lot of traffic out in Borrego Springs, but it is really dark.
But you had a bike accident
Yeah,
at WTTC where a bike hit another bike.
yeah,
I mean, couldn't see it.
yep. So you really want to have good lights. And I will tell you on the exact flip side of this, I wish I had a picture of it. One of our unsupported racers at the 508 last year showed up with the most amazing bike light setup I have ever seen. He had down his drops, he had, I think, 3 sets on each side. And he'd just turn them on till they burned out, turn the next ones on till they burned out. And they're tiny. I mean, they're like the size of my finger. They're like little skinny lights and they're bright. But he had between the 3 sets enough to keep him going the entire race. And I can assure you, he did not notice the difference. As far as weight or aerodynamics, it made no difference. But he was well lit, easy to see, and very obvious on the road. So definitely something, again, if you're coming from a triathlon background or a Gran Fondo background, bike lights are something you probably don't think much about. I think in the ultra world, one of the most important things you can have in your equipment locker.
I mean, nice, and they're lightweight too.
Oh yeah.
How about clothes? Let's start with the rider, but also clothes for the crew.
Right, so kind of a oddball thing. So normally you go out, you do your Ironman triathlon, you probably got one kit, you're throwing on and off and you're good, or you go ride your Gran Fondo, you're not too worried about changing your shorts every few hours. So what do you bring for RAAM? Or even a 500-mile qualifying race?
I don't change a lot, but in RAAM, you want to keep as clean as you can in certain areas of your body because you can develop some things that will cause you some real issues, saddle sores. But I bring about 5 pair of bibs, same amount of jerseys. You've got to have winter clothes because you're going to have, it can get really, really cold out there. You got to have rain gear. Got to have a couple of helmets. I always bring 2 pair of shoes and gloves. I don't like regular cycling gloves, but I want to have warm gloves for night. But yeah.
Yeah, and I think
A couple
that's,
pair of glasses, and it's nice to have clear lenses.
yeah, so again, things you may not think about coming from a very traditional background as a road racer, crit racer, whatever you might be racing, is temperature issues, right? So we just got back from Texas, and it was as hot as 85 degrees, sunny and warm. We had a couple days that were quite chilly and one that was rainy. So even for that, you need to kind of be prepared for everything. And the longer the race, RAO, you might have more stable weather at.
It's about a 40 to 50 degree temperature shift,
Well,
though. 'Cause
so
it
even
can
that,
get
right?
really hot, but then in the 40s at night.
Right. So even that. So even a 500-mile race, you're dealing with big temperature swings. With RAAM, you get everything, the kitchen sinks being thrown at you, literally. So one of the interesting things I think that a lot of people gloss over that is an interesting one is shoes, right? So again, the longer you're riding, the more this becomes an issue. Or if it might be really hot, your feet swell. And so your normal shoes may not fit. So quite often for RAM, you're buying a set of shoes that's a half to a size bigger to accommodate your foot over the course of the race.
Yeah, when I did solo, I always had a pair of shoes that was a full size bigger.
Yep. And so always, just some oddball things. And really, when you're doing RAM, be prepared for everything. Warm weather, cold weather, multiple helmets, sunglasses, or glasses are an interesting one. Your eyes can dry out. So a lot of riders who, unlike me, have to wear glasses, do wear glasses for safety and eye protection. Clear lens is critical because you're riding at night. Even like a yellow tint lens or light tint lens for cloudy weather, and sunglasses. So you kind of, in the clothing department, be ready for everything coming at you. And I think one key aspect, and you can get them on just about everything, is have some reflective clothing. Have something on your body, even if it's a little ankle strap or something. But they make, like, Primal Wear has integrated into some of their jerseys now reflective material.
Right.
So super cool products out there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back to 2021 when it was the hottest RAM ever, and raw. And I mean, that first night didn't get below 100 degrees. And, I ended up in the ER needing IV. It was really hot.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't stress how hot it was. But finishing Durango, I'm in vest, arm warmers, buff over my face, knee warmer. It was freezing going into Durango.
Yep. And so even with the heat and things like that, or even just comfort, you may consider getting, as opposed to a jersey, just like a light fitting shirt that's loose that, kind of allows a little airflow for you. Again, all things that should be kind of tested and tried before you get to your big race, but don't cut corners. Don't cut corners on your clothes because you could very well need them.
And I don't think we're even going to get into medical supplies in this discussion because I want to have sunscreen on there too.
Yeah, so of course, when you get into medical supply stuff, bring the basics, Always good to have sunscreen, a first aid kit, basic things you'll need for the road. But fortunately, on RAAM's course, there are, pharmacies and stuff along the way. You can get a lot of that stuff. But, to your point, don't forget it.
Right.
Because quite often you might need it, even just a little wound wash, some kind of basic first aid usually will get you through a race pretty easily. Crew clothes, kind of a different story, but crew needs to be thoughtful when they pack because while the racer gets to bring everything they want, the crew doesn't. So
kind of this size bag for the crew.
that one's probably a little small,
bit small.
but gives you the right idea. It's close. You want to be able to pack most of your stuff in a small duffel bag.
It's a really nice gift for your crew. Race memento is the bag they're allowed to bring their stuff in.
Yeah, and you can pack pretty well. So I took a bag slightly larger than the one you just had to Texas, and it packed almost all my clothing for 12 days. So, I carried a backpack too that had a computer and some stuff. But, so pack smart. Pack things you can wear day in, day out. They might be easy to wash at the sink and easy to dry. They can also pack tightly. Remember things like hats, sunglasses. Choose your footwear carefully and smartly. While Crocs are pretty nifty and comfortable, they're not necessarily the best for running around in.
Doing hand-ups.
Flip-flops, while I love to wear them, they are not a very good shoe for a crew member. So again, be smart because you're going to have to use these things, whether it's 48 hours in a 500-mile race, 9 to 12 days in RAM. Doesn't matter. You're going to have to be in this clothing, and also be considerate and thoughtful of your other crew members that are in the van with you. Take care of your hygiene, make sure toothbrushes, deodorant, all those good things.
Crew's got to bring warm clothes too.
Yep.
I mean, and that can be a hoodie, pair of jogging pants, whatever. But I mean, you got to have something because you're going to be out helping the rider. You're not always going to be in the warm or the cool vehicle.
Exactly. So when I am at RAAM, I always pack shorts, t-shirts, all the things I would need for warm weather. I also bring a raincoat and I bring a light kind of puff jacket. And generally you don't need much more than that, but and a sweatshirt. So between all that stuff, I can stay plenty warm, but also consider, I'm not going over Wolf Creek Pass, which can be cold. Even the rains out in Ohio can be chilly. There certainly can be soaking wet. So again, you got to kind of pack smart for all conditions, but you don't get to bring as much as the racer gets.
And it's amazing. You really have to be aware of the temperatures because as your rider fatigues and as you fatigue, 70 degrees at night feels really cold.
Yes, and the other thing too is keep in mind, like if you're caught in a rainstorm, it feels much colder than it is, right. And it's also nice to get in and out of wet clothes. So, you can jump. It could be a really warm, rainstorm, but you jump in your car and there's some AC blowing. It's cold.
Freezing.
It's freezing cold. So it is kind of good to cover all things, and also for the crew. People ask, "Oh, do I have to have reflective vest and a bracelet or an anklet that's reflective?" Well, you don't have to have both. But again, you're in some pretty dark roads, some pretty dark places. It's better to be visible than not visible. So whenever I'm asked, I would always say, err to the side of caution, get good reflective equipment and wear it as much as you can. It's really for your safety.
And it's really nice now. I mean, my reflective little belt that I wear around, it's a couple of straps over your shoulders and around the waist, and I don't even notice it.
Yeah, and again, you can get cool products now. Like there's some really nice baseball hats that have reflective material. If you're wearing like running tights or something out when you're crewing because they're comfortable, all reflective, And my attitude is the more the better, Knowing you're not in a fashion contest, so don't worry about it. You're more in a safety contest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that pretty much covers racer and crew clothing, be thoughtful and prepared about it.
One thing we always bring now is a beach umbrella, especially doing relay. It's really nice to be out there with your crew person, giving you shade in the Mojave.
Yeah, so there's some definite oddball pieces of equipment, right? So an umbrella is really nice. A quick folding chair that you can sit down in, even just for a minute while, massage therapist might be working on you or you're eating. A purely luxury item, but also kind of nice, are hanging showers, or now they have little machines that kind of heat water and take a quick roadside shower. Because sometimes, especially in longer events like RAAM or Austria or something, you may not have the opportunity for any amenities out there, and just being able to take a quick rinse off, feels good.
Yep.
Very much so. Try to think if there's any other random things. No, I'll probably think of them randomly.
Of course. Yeah.
But again, you want to be prepared with stuff, but you don't need to bring everything under the sun with you. I mean, it's for solo racers, I think a scale is a good idea. Teams, you probably don't need that so much. Maybe a 2-person team, but not as much. But yeah, you just don't need to bring tons of extra stuff with you. But be very thoughtful and complete in what you do bring. So I think that kind of brings us to our last little bit here.
We can see them in the picture.
We can barely see them.
Bottle of water.
So something very unique to the ultra racing world. Of course, randonneurs don't have to worry about this. Bike packers don't either. But Ironman triathletes and recreational Grand Fondo riders don't have to deal with this stuff. But kind of the oddball things of our sport, these are the basics. And again, every race has its own rules. So be sure to read your race's rules, what's required and what's not required. So generally, you're going to probably have some type of race number, but not always. But see whatever the requirements are. Whether it's the race provides them, you provide them yourself, you write them on your car with shoe polish.
You do little glass markers that, yep.
Yep. So whatever it is, you're probably going to have some type of race number identification. That's pretty straightforward. Bike racks, before we get into some of the oddball things. Think about how you're going to rack your bikes and what you're going to do. The kind of old school traditional folding trunk racks work on some cars, not others. If you have a rental car, you have like rail bike racks, you got to make sure there are rails on there. So try to be thoughtful about what you need. Try to understand your rental cars if you're renting them, or if you have your own car and you're bringing it, what you need for that. I think one of the coolest products out there is Sea Sucker, because they work on anything. And you can take them off and take them home with you. So I don't know all the models and things they make, but I know there's different models that do different things. But you could probably have a couple setups of those Sea Suckers, and you're rocking. It doesn't matter what car you get, So
I highly recommend not using a roof rack where you need to remove your front wheel, because those get forgotten.
They get
a lot, and it's a pain to.
Well, that, and if your crew is not super experienced with putting front wheels on, it's easy to get your brake rubbing,
especially with discs.
And if you're tired, right? The less taking apart of things you have to do over time is a better thing. And also consider the height of your crew, what they have to do. You're tall, I'm not. So reaching up and putting a bike on a roof rack, depending on the car, could be easy or not.
That's going to be tough.
Yeah. So think about the racks you're using, what you're going to do, how many bikes you need on each car you have. Obviously solo racers have it relatively easy. 8-person RAAM teams, not so much. Very much more difficult problem to solve. But there's a lot of great racking systems out there. And like I said, for the ease of not caring what vehicle you have and getting it and going, the Sea Suckers are pretty cool. So now a couple of things that are really kind of ultra racy specific. And again, read your rules. Some races may or may not require these things, but we'll show you what they are for the sake of demonstration, so amber lights, pretty straightforward. These in particular, magnetic mounts on the bottom, just sit on the back of your car. You want them in flashing mode.
And you don't want to be able to see them from this side.
Right. So they should not have 360 visibility, only facing the back, but pretty straightforward. I prefer these. They're battery-powered LED. They're great. If you put fresh batteries in at the starter RAAM, you're probably going to get over halfway with one set of batteries. I would always have a backup set, no question. You can also get the kind that spin around. You have to take half of it so it doesn't 360 visibility, but they plug into your cigarette lighters in your car. The problem is some cars don't have cigarette lighters now, and those lights also, because they have bulbs in them.
Aren't they called power outlets now?
Power outlets, right? We don't. Yeah, I got that. We don't smoke cigarettes anymore. Fair enough, but they're also bulbs, and so they tend to blow.
Right.
These things are low power. They're easy to use. I'd say the only drawback to these can be some cars don't have metal, so you have to tape them on or do something.
See them mounted way back.
Yeah. But anyway, amber flashing lights, pretty straightforward. I would always have a backup set just in case, because things go wrong on the course. And crews, you should always get out, every time you get out to service your rider, just make sure your lights are working, make sure they're bright. Just like bike lights, they're a function of safety on the road. They let other cars, when a car sees those lights in front of them, it alerts them. It's like seeing your hazard lights on. People in vehicles register that much more so than a bike light. So they really are a safety thing, pretty easy to get, and definitely have backups. Again, here's an item that some events require, some don't. We do at our events. Slow moving vehicle triangle. This one happens to be just your basic magnet. I usually tape around the edges so it doesn't fly off. This is completely reflective. So just so you know, again, just something for a car's headlights to hit and you see it. You don't need something necessarily like this, but you do need a DOT approved triangle
Right.
at our events. Again, not every event requires them, but you can get like really basic plastic frame ones. You can get like metal ones, which we used to use. These are nice just because they're light, they're easy, pretty
A
straightforward.
lot of we would glue magnets on the back,
Yeah,
and then you just can slap it on and pull it off. And
yeah, and pretty simple. And again, always a good idea to have a spare one of these floating around your
Yeah.
car because you hit a pothole, they fall off, or
meet
whatever.
another racer who lost their
Lost.
sign or lights, and
Yep.
and you let somebody use your lights, and immediately one of yours goes out. So.
Yep. Murphy's Law, right? So anyway, reflective triangle, pretty straightforward. Lots of different options. This is just one we happen to have for all the RAAM events. And then this is another one that is also really important. Again, not every event will necessarily require these. This is super reflective and should be visible. So your bicycle should not be covering this up. It should be visible, whether it's in your back windshield, on your bumper, wherever it works around your car.
And don't peel and stick.
Yeah, so these ones in particular that we have, you do not want to just peel this off and stick it on your car because it will not come off. So we use contact paper to hold them on or underneath it, either one.
Put contact paper on the car, vehicle. Put that. I still don't peel it.
Yeah,
And then you put contact paper over it.
yep. But again, it's just something to alert traffic behind you what's going on. Because when they see a slow car moving down the road, they might just be like, oh, I just want to get past them and cut right in front of you. Whereas if you have something that tells you what is happening, hopefully they're a little more patient and understanding that when they come around the car, they might see a bicycle right there.
How about vehicles for equipment? How many vehicles do you need?
Right, so this is a question we get a lot. Of course, you probably get it at your race. I get it at RAAM all the time.
How many crew? So I guess
Yeah.
our bodies, equipment.
Yeah, so, the number of vehicles is kind of dependent on how many crew you have. But let's just go with really the types of vehicles rather than necessarily how many. Because some people like a lot, for a solo racer, a follow vehicle and somewhere to sleep, or a second follow vehicle.
That's how I feel about two-person relay too.
Yeah, you
I want to go as minimalist as possible.
don't need to go crazy. So I'll go with my favorite, the minivan. I think it is the best follow vehicle, no question, not even close. Spacey, it's got, everything you need. It's not a super high vehicle. You can get stuff in and out of it easy. It's comfortable. And they're agile on the road. So if you have
The
to go,
seats fold in now. You can really set it up.
yeah, and if you got to go run a quick errand or you have to pull off somewhere, they're small, they're easy to get around. And hopefully you don't have to do this, but if you have to make a U-turn, they're pretty easy to make a U-turn in. Ultimately, my absolute favorite follow vehicle, and I've driven most of the vehicles we're about to talk about, but that would be my number one choice. A big 12-passenger cargo van. Not my favorite vehicle, but not bad. It has a lot of room in it. You can easily get some sleeping space in there. Not very agile. They don't drive very well. Not my favorites, but they work. Guess the next in line would be the Sprinters.
Mm-hmm.
My experience with Sprinters is They do, so the pluses is there's plenty of room in it for equipment, sleeping, crews can sleep. There's a lot of space. I personally don't think they drive very well. I think they're cumbersome. They're hard to find pull-offs for. Um, they're not the best in general. And you have to be the bigger the vehicle you get, you should always be aware of what's happening all the way around you. Minivan are bigger. But the bigger the vehicle you get, the more aware you gotta be.
Yep. People can't see around a Sprinter van.
No, and they're tricky. But I get it because they kind of double as an RV.
Oh yeah.
And so that is a benefit to them. So maybe in a good situation would be to have a minivan follow vehicle, Sprinter as kind of your auxiliary extra vehicle. And then we'll get to the great debate. to motorhome or not motorhome, RV or not RV.
I think what you just said is the way to go.
Yeah,
I do not like RVs.
I again, pluses and minuses, right? I think they're nice. If you're a solo racer and you have so let me qualify this by saying I would always get the smallest RV. Again, the bigger you get, the harder they are to handle. You get the big Rockstar tour buses. You have to have drivers for them. You can't just pull them off anywhere. They're tricky. And the one thing about RVs, one, they're really hard to get one way. So if you can get one, that's great. Or if you can drive a round trip, that's great. They're expensive. They're an expense I really don't think you need to have.
Gas, very fuel inefficient.
Very fuel inefficient. And they are the type of thing, they're a nice luxury, I guess, but not necessary. And if you don't have a budget for it, you don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
You really don't. Hotels work, but you can always, if you have a good minivan, you're going to be able to sleep anywhere. Or have a couple sleeping bags for the crew and toss them in a park on the side of the road.
We're using a 12-passenger van and a Sprinter.
Yep. So again, kind of an ideal setup, right? But the RV thing, we get asked a lot. They're fine. They work. They're a nice luxury, depending on the comfort level you want for your crew, et cetera. But again, this is a bike race. It's not a vacation. Like you're supposed to be working and functional. But if you have budgets for it, fine. But know there are places that are hard to drive them.
You got tanks to dump and extra, and it requires more crew.
Yep. Yeah. So again, a big expense I don't think is necessary. If you have one at your disposal, great, use it. But also make sure your drivers are very aware of no matter what vehicle, they practice driving these things and know that the bigger the vehicle, the fewer places you have to pull over, accessibility of things. If you're running diesel on some of these vehicles, again, another thing to consider. So I think that covers most of those issues, but
RVs get a lot of penalties too, because they've got special routes that they've got to take, and
they're the most likely vehicle to obstruct traffic.
Yep.
And in a large part because they can't maneuver and you are not necessarily aware of everything going on behind you. More often than not, we do have issues with them. So ultimately, all these things you kind of need, depending on the rules. Some events may not even allow RVs, I'm not sure. But make sure you're operating within your race rules. You get the signage, the stuff you need, all the other supplies, clothing and that. Pack carefully, thoughtfully, completely. Racer, you're better having a little extra than not enough. In vehicles, you don't need to go nuts on. You just don't, have something good and efficient. And more than anything, if you have a really good crew, all the extra bells and whistles matter less and less.
Yep.
And I think that kind of covers the basic equipment and supplies for ultra events. I mean, there's lots of nitty gritty, but that a lot of that stuff's kind of a live and learn what you like, what you don't like scenario. It's kind of like food, you know, learn what works and doesn't, and go with that stuff. So I think that's it for now.
All right. Thanks for tuning in.
Yep.